The supernatural is closer than you imagine. Paranormal M takes you through chilling tales and haunted mysteries. Subscribe now. Your curiosity may cost you sleep. The Haunted Child. In the quiet seaside town where I grew up, everybody knew about them. They weren't exactly outcasts, at least. Not in the normal sense. They lived far from town in a rotting, ivy-choked manor that leaned toward the cliffs as if eager to throw itself into the sea. People whispered that they were cultists, dabbling in rituals meant to call things best left unnamed. No one ever intervened. We left them alone, and they left us alone. Or so we told ourselves. Everything changed when the children started to vanish. The first was a boy named Daniel, only 7 years old, who disappeared on his walk back from the harbor one misty evening. Then a girl, Emily. She didn't return from her piano lesson the next day. Fear settled over the town like a damp fog. And though nobody who really was saying it outright, but everybody was thinking the same thing. That manor. The police tried, and they swept the beaches and searched the pine woods. Even interrogated the strange family in the manor. Nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was festering in that cliffside house. One night, clutching a cheap camping lantern and my father's old pocket knife, I decided to find out for myself. The manor was larger than I remembered, its cracked windows like blind eyes reflecting the moonlight. The air grew colder as I approached, thick and salty with the smell of the ocean. The night felt unnatural, like a held breath, but I pushed forward. I slipped in through a warped back door that shuddered as it opened, and inside the house smelt of wet stone and rotting books. The wallpaper had peeled away in strips, exposing symbols carved into the plaster beneath it. Every board creaked under my weight as if warning me to turn back. That was when I saw the trap door. The stairs leading down were narrow and crooked, and as I descended, a sharp metallic smell rose to meet me. Iron, salt, and blood. My heart hammered and the lantern flickered, casting distorted shadows against the walls. In the center of the cellar stood a table draped in ragged velvet, its edges crusted with something dark. Strange runes were etched not only into the walls, but into the ceiling above, spiraling toward a single point. And around the table, glass jars full of some black liquid flickering in the lantern's light. It's as though the contents were alive. The air was heavy and suffocating, as if the room itself were underwater. I turned to leave, with bile rising in my throat, and that's when I saw them, the children. They stood in uneven rows, silent and barefoot. Something about them was wrong in a way that my mind refused to process. Their eyes weren't eyes at all anymore, but pools of shifting gray mist swirling. They were swallowing the lantern's light, and their faces were pale and expressionless, but their mouths began to twist into smiles unnaturally. They were brittle smiles that looked like they would crack their skin. Then I understood these weren't children anymore, they were vessels. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. They began to move as one. Their sounds were almost noiseless, and they were walking on the stone. The cold that poured from them was so intense it burned. It was pulling the warmth just right out of my bones, and the ritual hadn't been to summon a demon. It had been to make the children into its eyes and hands. Their smiles were widening as they closed in. My body locked with terror, my mind screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. One of them raised its hand, pale, trembling, and possibly light, brushed my sleeve with fingers as cold as seawater. Then everything went black. When I woke, I was lying on the cliff's edge just past dawn. The manor behind me, nothing but an empty shell. No trapdoor, no jaws, no altar, just dust and silence. The children were never found. I never told anybody what I'd seen. But even now at dusk, sometimes I glimpse them, standing in the far corners of my vision, their mist-filled eyes fixed on me, waiting. And I know it isn't over. And I just want to say sorry about audio anomalies. If you only could see my situation, you would forgive me. But I'm giving it a good go. Next story. The Night at Willow House. So my ex-boyfriend and I were together for a little bit over a year before I finally walked away. Honestly, it was chaos. I won't spill every detail of that relationship here, but toxic doesn't even begin to cover it. And this is going to be a long one, so buckle up and maybe grab a drink. Anyway, I'd been on the Nexa shot and some birth control injection for about 8 months. That was before I met my ex. My periods had been irregular during that time, mostly just random spotting, nothing scary. And then I met Ellie and instantly thought he was perfect. Or Eli, sorry. I ignored every single red flag, even though there were plenty. I just dove in head first. A few hours after meeting him, I started having this ridiculously heavy flow. It was totally out of character for me. I brushed it off and I thought it was stress or something, but weeks went by and the bleeding didn't stop. I didn't have insurance, and with how expensive healthcare is now, I didn't really want to see a doctor either. All I did was show up for my next birth control appointment. Fast forward about a month and my skin went crazy. Painful cystic acne everywhere. I tried every home remedy and every mask and even weird internet tricks, but nothing was working. Looking back, it feels like my body was rejecting him from day one and I just couldn't see it. About 6 weeks after we broke up, I went to a small town to party with some old friends. I drank too much, I laughed too hard, and I felt exhausted. We were at this gorgeous old house, 3 stories, almost 150 years old. It was sitting on a massive stretch of land about maybe half an hour from the main road. I told my friends I was going to take a quick 20-minute nap downstairs, and they warned me not to. This house has always given me chills, like there's something off about it. Kind of feeling where your stomach drops before everything happens. But I was tipsy and I was stubborn, so I went down anyway. I lay on a couch facing the wall, pulled a blanket over me, rolled onto my back. And that's when everything started to shift. It's hard to describe, it was like a trance, but real. I turned onto my side, blanket tucked underneath my chin, and I felt someone behind me. Not just like warm, like hot, like scalding skin hot. I turned my head just enough to see, and it was Eli's face, but warped and melted into something monstrous. It was red and wet looking, and his teeth sharp and eyes flat. I couldn't move, and my eyes could dart around, but my body was locked. I heard footsteps upstairs and voices and pots banging and my friend trying to wake me. Eli's demon self stayed there, and his head tilting like an animal. I put a hand on my shoulder, long cracked yellow nails digging in. The eyes, though, stayed exactly his. Burned into my brain, and everything just went black. Woke up drenched in sweat with my friend shaking me. I left that night, drove home shaking, and I've never been back to that house. Haven't told anyone in real life because honestly, I'm just terrified. And here's the weirdest part. About a week after that night, my bleeding stopped completely. It was just gone. It's been over 2 months, and I still can't get it out of my head. I don't feel anything for him anymore, nothing at all, but I can't forget what I saw. And yeah, I do believe in God, so anything helps. house that watches. The bedrooms sit on the upper floor, arranged around a narrow landing that circles a stairwell like a quiet watchtower. Everyone keeps their doors shut at night, not out of privacy, but because sometimes you can hear the soft thud of footsteps going up and down the stairs. You open the door to check, and there's never anyone there, and there's always no one. And last night I had to brush my teeth before bed, and the bathroom isn't upstairs anymore. Ever since the renovation, it tucked down in the far corner on the first floor. It's past 3 doors that stay open at night like moths mid-breath. Those rooms always feel like they're looking at you. Nothing to see, or at least that's what I tell myself. When I came back up, I swear I caught a glimpse of someone standing just inside the den, just a few feet from the armchair that we never really use anymore. It's the same den where I once had sleep paralysis so violent I moved into my brother's room for 2 months. I had been sick, and I woke to a pale hand pressing against my cheek. There were fingers dragging as though peeling something away. And I've dreamt of somebody living behind that wall, and later my cousin admitted to dreaming the exact same thing. We never talked about it before, and, well, even the dogs react to the place. Our newest one, Fig, growls at the den's threshold and refuses to cross after dark. He's never been like that in any way other than, well, that part of the house. He's gotten older and he's grown more nervous and won't stay in a room unless the lamp's on. I won't nap in the hallway at all, honestly. Now he curls up outside our door upstairs instead, like he's guarding us or hiding from something. Honestly, I don't blame him. The upstairs feels thinner somehow, like the air's been sifted through a filter. But there are still spots, even up here, where it's heavier and harder to breathe. Seeing that shape downstairs rattled me. I actually stepped back down one stair to double-check, squinting into the den. There's nothing, just shadows and furniture. And this isn't unusual anymore. I mean, maybe it's my mind making shapes out of the dark, and maybe not. That whole section of the house feels tilted, as if the floorboards are warped or the ceiling's too low. I didn't go back down after that, not that night. The Attic's Whisper. I'm a 30-year-old female, and our family home isn't just old, it's ancient. It's a sprawling stone house built by Polish craftsmen before the Great War. There's always something strange about it, like the walls themselves are listening. As a child, I hated the attic and the crumbling shed behind the house, and couldn't even explain why. It felt like somebody was always waiting there. My mother grew up in that same house with her parents and brothers. She used to tell me I had the same eye color as her little sister who died young. And coincidentally, I was given her name too, and when I turned 14, my mother finally told me the truth. That aunt had hanged herself, not in the attic, but in the shed behind the house. It was a bitter winter morning. It was around that time I started to notice things. First, it was just creaks and whispers, nothing unusual in an old house. Then I began seeing shapes and figures flickering at the edge of my vision. And it wasn't just at night, but in broad daylight too. Once I woke up to see a woman standing at the foot of my bed with her hair loose. It was as if she'd been caught in the rain. Terrified, I pulled my blanket over my head. When I dared to peek again, she was gone. I tried convincing myself it was just stress or my imagination, but these things started without any trigger. I wasn't reading ghost stories, and I wasn't thinking of my aunt. They simply happened. One afternoon, I clearly heard someone opening and closing the wardrobe right next to my door. Thought it was my father, but the house was empty, and my younger brother was still asleep upstairs. Hadn't heard a single door open or close, and no footsteps in the hall, nothing. The wardrobe creaked shut again as I stood there frozen. And the worst came one night. I woke up to a sound like small animals scurrying. I kept 2 pet hamsters at the time, so I assumed it was them. But as I grew fully awake, I realized the sound wasn't scratching, it was footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy, like someone walking in boots dusted with gravel across my wooden floor, and from the door straight toward my bed at that. I couldn't move, I couldn't even breathe, and after a few minutes of sheer smothering silence, it stopped. I leapt up, turned on the light, and my hamsters were asleep with their cage. Well, I shook their toys, I checked every little hut and wheel they had. Nothing could have made that sound. The next morning, I went out to the shed. Couldn't explain why, but I had the sudden thought, maybe it's her. Maybe my aunt is trying to tell me something. I said it out loud. What do you want from me? And then, like a whisper planted inside my head, gather her things. It was all I could think to do. I asked my mother what my aunt's belongings were that were still in the attic. We found some old letters, a broken music box, a few paintings, a diary. Took them to my room and arranged them on a shelf. And that was it. Everything stopped. The footsteps and the shapes and the woman in my bed all gone. Even the heavy, anxious air in the attic and the shed seemed to be clear. And for a while, I convinced myself it had all just been in my head. But deep down, I know better. I didn't dream those things. I didn't imagine them. And somehow, by saving what was left of her, I gave her rest. So for context, it all began when my parents started clearing out the attic for renovation. I didn't help, but I remember old things vanishing like a porcelain doll with cracked glassy eyes. Always unsettled me. And I was never afraid of dolls, but that one, I just couldn't even look at it. Last ride out. I should have known better than to wander after midnight. But time slipped away from me. And by the time I reached the train depot, my last ride home had already departed. The place is almost abandoned with silence except for the buzzing neon sign above the ticket booth. It was flickering like it might sputter out at any moment. The air felt stale and heavy, like it hadn't moved in hours. And I wasn't alone, though. At the far end of the beach sat a woman. Her coat was threadbare and damp. It's as though she'd been standing in that rain for days. She leaned forward slightly, with her elbows resting on her knees. But her face stayed angled toward me. Her eyes never blinked, not once. I clutched my backpack tighter and I tried to just stare at the ground. But the pressure of her gaze made my stomach knot. And something about her was wrong and off in a way I couldn't really name. I glanced up at the timetable. The next train was due any second. Oh, good. A few minutes more of this, and, well, it'd be just another late-night story I'd tell myself to laugh it off later. And finally, a faint glow appeared at the far end of the tracks. The train rolled in with a hiss and a grinding of brakes. And then I stepped on quickly, like not daring to look back at the women. The conductor barely nodded at me from underneath the shadow of his brimmed hat. Fine by me, I was just glad to be away from that stare. I settled into a cracked leather seat, the smell of old smoke clinging to it. I exhaled slowly. The train lurched forward, and out of habit I peeked out the window. And there she was, still on that bench, still staring at the train, like sliding away. Her head turned slightly, following me. I should have been reassurance, or rather, it should have been reassuring that she hadn't boarded, but her unbroken gaze through the glass sent a tremor down my spine. You're tired, I told myself. Everything feels scarier in the dark, too. The train clattered over the rails, and the rhythmic sound soothing me for about a moment. I was starting to relax when the conductor's voice cut through the silence. "You're the only one on board tonight," he said. His voice was strange, almost like it had gravel in it. I froze because something about the way he said it, like it was a warning, not a fact, made my pulse quicken. Slowly, I looked up at the small mirror mounted above the aisle, and in its dim reflection I saw her, the woman sitting in the last row smiling. Impossible. I'd seen her outside and she hadn't gotten on. My heart hammered as I forced myself to turn around to see for myself. The seat was empty. My breath hitched. Maybe it was a trick of the glass, and maybe my nerves were eating me alive. I just turned back around, pressing my palms together, trying to keep them from shaking. But in that mirror, she was still there. Her grin had widened now, stretching far too much, and her teeth looking wrong, too many and too sharp. Her eyes glowed faintly like dying embers. I wanted to shout, but no sound would come out. The conductor stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the controls, as if he didn't see her. I blinked hard, hoping the vision would vanish, but instead in the reflection she was closer. 3 rows back now, moving without making a sound. I spun around and it was empty. This isn't real. It can't be real. I turned forward again and the reflection was gone, and relief surged for about half a heartbeat, and then I felt it, a slow, cold breath against my ear. I didn't want to, but I turned my head, and she was there, crouched in the aisle just inches from me. Her grin stretched impossibly wide, her mouth trembling with a soundless laugh, and her eyes burning into mine. "Room for one more?" she said. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, and her fingers, long and bone-thin, curled toward my shoulder. And then the train jolted to a stop. The doors hissed open, and suddenly she was gone. The car was empty again, just me and the conductor. Shaking, I stumbled off into the cold air, not daring to look back. And now every time I pass that depot, I feel her eyes on me, waiting and smiling. I think I know deep down that I wasn't the only passenger that night. The House That Hummed. When I was a kid, my weekends often belonged to Grandma's cottage at the end of the Pine Hollow. It wasn't much to look at, just a squat, moss-covered place hidden behind a crooked iron gate. Felt like stepping into another time. The air smelled of wax and lavender with a faint metallic tang, like old coins forgotten in a drawer. By day it was magical, but at night it was uneasy, and it was humming. And lying in the attic room beneath the slanted roof, I would hear it, a soft, tuneless hum. It was drifting from somewhere, like inside the walls even. At first I told myself it was the plumbing or the ancient pipes moaning from cold. But no, this was different. This was low and deliberate, like a lullaby sung from clenched teeth. One evening I brought it up to Grandma over cocoa. She didn't even blink. She just stared at the warm kitchen table and just smiled her tiny secret smile and said, "Oh, honey, this house likes to talk at night. It's older than me, older than you'll ever be. Don't let it scare you." And that was the last time I asked. I was too young to know how to press for answers, and the humming just went on. Years passed and I grew older, and weekends at Pine Hollow became rare. The sounds faded into memory, and one spring morning Grandma died in her sleep. Felt like somebody had quietly erased a chapter of my life. The cottage was sold off within months, and I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. The new owners decided to open the place up, which is, well, their words, not mine. Out came the old beams and warped paneling, wallpaper that had been there since before I was born. And that's when they found what was hidden. So I got a call one rainy afternoon. The woman on the line was breathless, and in the wall she said that they'd found boxes. Tiny wooden boxes sealed with twine. Dozens of them. Inside each box were things no one wanted to describe but did anyway. Small braids of hair tied with ribbons, yellowed photographs of children's faces cut cleanly from the paper, and in some, tiny glass jars containing fingernails. They asked if I wanted them back since it had been my grandmother's house. I said no. Of course I said no. But the image stayed with me like a splinter, and I started to dig into the history of the cottage. What I found was worse. Long before Grandma bought this place, Pine Hollow had been whispered about in old county records. A string of children had gone missing in the 1940s, vanished on the walk home from school and never found. Locals claimed the house on the hill swallowed sounds and souls alike. The details just didn't make sense, but the pattern did, and the humming I remembered from the walls had lined up exactly with the earliest reports. I don't know if Grandma ever knew what she was living in, never really spoke any of it. Never hinted she suspected the house's story, but sometimes when I think back on her quiet smile at the kitchen table, I wonder. I'll never go back to Pine Hollow, even though the new owners invited me to see their restoration. Memory that attic, the low hum vibrating through the walls. That's enough to keep me away. Still, some nights when the wind rattles my window, I swear I can almost hear it again. I can't help but wonder, was Grandma just another tenant of that house? Or was she the one that was humming to all of us like this whole time? The things that moved. It began with little things. My wallet or my headphones or even the charger for my laptop. Items I used daily. They kept vanishing when I needed them most, only to reappear later in places that made no sense. At first I laughed it off, and living alone does have its perks. But also, no one is to blame when stuff goes missing. Figured I was overtired or distracted maybe. But as it happened again and again, a knot started to form in my stomach. Something wasn't right. At first it was routine. I'd come home from work, drop my wallet on the coffee table like always, and go about my evening. The next morning it would be gone. I'd turn the apartment upside down, kitchen drawers, laundry basket, even under the bathroom mat. But hours later I'd find it somewhere absurd, balanced on top of the microwave, shoved into the back of a closet, and even once inside the freezer. The first few times I muttered jokes to myself. You're exhausted, losing your touch. But after a while, I stopped laughing. TV remote disappeared next, and barely even watched TV. I do like late-night documentary now and then. I remembered sort of just sitting on the armrest of the couch. It was after some boring history program. The next evening it was gone, and I ripped through the cushions, flipped the rug, and opened every cabinet. There's nothing. 3 days later, there it was, wedged behind the toilet tank. I'd never put it there. The unease became a constant hum underneath my skin. Doors locked and windows shut, and no signs of forced entry. Nobody else had a key. It was just me, wasn't it? Then came the shoes, my boots, the pair that I wore every single day. I slipped them off at the front door like always before heading to bed. The next morning, gone. 2 days later, I found them lined up perfectly underneath my bed, and I never put shoes under there. But by then, I was spiraling. Was someone sneaking in or some creep playing games? I considered setting up a camera, but the idea made me feel ridiculous. Who breaks into an apartment just to hide things? Had to be me, right? Like maybe I was doing it in my sleep. Then the wallet again. This time gone for a full week. I had left on the kitchen counter before bed, and by morning, nothing. I checked the garage and the car and the fridge and the garbage and nothing. Just as I was ready to cancel all my cards, I found it under a pile of laundry I'd already folded. I hadn't put it there. And then my phone disappeared. I always left it on the nightstand, always. But one morning it just wasn't there. I didn't sleep at all, and I just kept imagining someone standing in the dark beside my bed reaching out for it. Next week blurred together, and nights spent pacing the apartment and listening for footsteps that never would come. Shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. Finally, I found the phone jammed under the couch. It was deep inside, like somebody just pushed it there on purpose, so my hands are just shaking so much while I'm holding this thing. And that's when I finally bought cameras, 2 of them. One for the living room, one facing my bedroom door, and if somebody was sneaking in, I'd see them. But that night, something worse happened. I woke to a faint sound, a low, muffled clink like glass being set down. My heart hammered in my chest as I lay frozen, straining to hear it again. Another sound followed, and softer this time, like fabric sliding across wood. I grabbed the nearest thing for protection, a broken umbrella, crept through the apartment. Nothing but silence again. So in the morning when I checked the camera footage, both files were gone. Not corrupted, not blank, but erased. Cold dread was pooling in my stomach. Like, was I erasing them or was it all me? Stopped going to work and I barely left the apartment. And food lost its taste and sleep became impossible. Couldn't tell anyone if I was imagining the sounds or if something was actually there waiting. Then one morning, I walked into the kitchen and I saw it on the counter. My phone. But it wasn't the phone that made my knees give out. It was the open text message on the screen. Did you miss me? It wasn't my message. And that was the moment I realized I had never been alone. Not once. Maybe I never will be. Mirror game. I used to think it was funny when my little brother Noah copied me. You know how younger siblings are. Always trying to tag along and always staring at you like you're some kind of celebrity. He would trail after me through the house and he'd mimic every move, and normally I would just roll my eyes, but he was only 8 after all and I was 16, so totally normal, right? At first it started small. He'd echo things I said. If I muttered about how much math homework sucked, he'd groan about his spelling words, and never mind that his homework was mostly gluing glitter to construction paper. If I lay on my stomach to watch TV, he'd do the same, and I thought it was cute and harmless. But then it shifted. He started dressing like me, and one Saturday morning I came downstairs wearing my favorite blue flannel. And there he was in his own tiny version of it, same pattern, same rolled sleeves, and I teased him. "I'm trying to be me, Noah." He smiled that wide-eyed, too-perfect smile and said, "I'm already like you." And that should have been sweet, right? And that's what I told myself. But even when he began copying my little habits, like how I twirled my hair when I was bored, I left the crusts of my sandwiches on the plate. Just a phase, I thought. Then came the whispers. One afternoon, I'm video chatting my friend Jamie about some stupid drama at school. We were laughing when I heard it because Noah just outside my door murmuring my words under his breath. Every sentence I said, he mouthed it. Every giggle he echoed, and through the crack in the door I saw him sitting cross-legged on the carpet. His lips were moving perfectly in sync with mine, his head tilted at the exact same angle. I slammed the door with my heart pounding. I forced a laugh, but he's just weird, I told myself. But something inside me started to knot. With a K. And it only got worse. To wake up to find him at the kitchen table eating exactly what I was eating. Same oatmeal, same spoon, same number of blueberries. He started choosing shoes that matched mine down to the laces. And if I wore a braid, so did he. He even begged Mom to buy him my brand of sneakers. And then one night at dinner, while I'm telling Mom and Dad about a weird dream I'd had, Noah interrupted. "That's not how it happened," he said. Then he recited my dream back to them word for word as if he'd dreamed it himself. My parents laughed, saying how connected we were, and I wanted to scream. The breaking point came last Thursday. Came home from school and I went to grab my journal from under my mattress. The one that nobody knew about. Pages felt wrong, like they'd been handed, and then I saw it. His handwriting. It was small and uneven, but definitely his. And at first I thought it was some weird prank, but then I read it. "Dear Journal, sometimes I wonder what it's like to stop being myself, to really become someone else, to take their place. I'm closer now, and she doesn't see it yet, but soon she will." My stomach turned, I flipped the page, and he'd written things only I would know. Copied my private thoughts from earlier entries. But at the bottom, in his shaky, childish scrawl, there was a line that I had never written. "One of us won't wake up. I don't blame you." My hands trembled so hard the journal almost slipped from my grip. I heard soft footsteps outside my room. My heart hammered and I opened the door. Noah stood there staring at me with a blank face, eyes locked on mine. "Why are you in my room?" I demanded. My voice was basically shaking and he tilted his head. Same way you do when I'm confused. This is their reply. "It's not your room anymore, it's ours." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean, ours?" Noah smiled, but it wasn't the innocent smile I knew. It was flat and empty like a reflection. "You and me were the same. I'm almost ready." Slammed the door, stumbled back, and almost ready for what? Locked myself in, but the walls felt thinner than paper. I stared in the mirror, searching my own face, and was I still even me? That night I didn't sleep, and I heard him outside my door breathing and pacing. Sometimes a soft tap like he was waiting. This morning I woke up to find another message. Not in my journal this time, but scratched deep into the wood floor beside my bed. "Tonight." I don't know what's coming, but I do know one thing. By the time the sun rises, only one of us should still be here. The Call from Emily. I hadn't thought about Emily in a decade now. Life has its way of stuffing old memories into dusty boxes in the attic of your mind. Until something cracks the lid open. For me, it was a phone call on a still November night. I was curled up in my favorite armchair, absent-mindedly scrolling through a half-finished documentary about haunted lighthouses. That's when my phone buzzed. The name glowing on the screen stopped me cold. It said Emily. We hadn't spoken since college, and without thinking I answered. "Hey, Jess." Her voice was pretty warm and familiar, like slipping to an old hoodie that still smelled faintly of autumn. "Yeah." For a second I couldn't breathe and said, "Emily, are you serious? God, it's been, 10 years?" We fell into the rhythm of old friends too easily. Talked about the bonfires we used to crash by the riverbank, late-night dares at the old cemetery, ridiculous costumes that we wore to the campus Halloween parties. Felt like nothing had changed, like we're still those reckless girls laughing under the harvest moon. And then something shifted. She started bringing up details I hadn't thought about since those days. Things even my closest friend had never known. How I once wrote anonymous poems and slid them under strangers' doors. How I carved my initials into the wooden bench behind the library with a stolen pocket knife. How I used to sneak out at 3 a.m. to watch the trains roll past the edge of town. How do you even remember all that? I asked. I was kind of half laughing and half nervous. Oh, Jess, she said softly. I remember everything. And her tone had an edge now, like a blade sliding out of its sheath. Then she began talking about things that she couldn't know, like my miscarriage, the way I keep a light on in the hallway because I'm afraid of sleeping in total darkness, the fight I'd had with my sister last Christmas. It was like she'd been sitting quietly in the corner of my life all along, watching. I never told you that, I whispered. Her reply came too quickly. Of course you didn't, but I know you. I've always known you. A shiver ran up my spine. I looked around. The walls were feeling too close and too thin. It was dim. You're not happy, are you, Jess? She murmured. My hands trembled like, what are you talking about? You've been pretending for so long, even back then. I yanked the phone from my ear and stared at her name in the glowing screen. Something wasn't right. None of this was right. I hung up. And for a long moment I just sat there, the silence pressing in the air thick and heavy, and I just needed to hear her voice again, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind, and I redialed. The phone rang once and then twice, and then a man's voice answered, and it was deep and tired. Hello? I hesitated, and I said, is Emily there? Silence stretched on the other end. And quietly he said, I'm sorry. Emily, she died 8 years ago. The world tilted. What? That's impossible. She just called me. Who is this? He asked sharply. Jessica, I was just talking to Emily on this number. Another silence, colder this time. I don't know who you're speaking to, the man said, but it wasn't Emily. She died in a fire, and I'm her brother. Blood roared in my ears, and my grip on the phone went slack. Emily was dead. How? I had just heard her laugh. I had just talked to her for hours, and this couldn't be real. I stared at my phone, waiting for it to ring again, half hoping, half praying it wouldn't. The shadows around me seemed to deepen, leaning in. I didn't sleep that night, and for days I just kind of went over the conversation, dissecting every word. I dug through old photos, I scrolled her social media memorial page, and really anything to find an explanation. The truth refused to make sense. Then a week later, as I was brushing my teeth, my phone rang again. It was her, and her name, Emily, burned like a brand on my screen. I froze, toothbrush in hand, hard hammering in my chest, and I didn't answer. I couldn't. The ringing grew louder and insistent. It was coming from inside my skull, and finally it stopped in a voicemail. Hey, Jess, her voice said, soft as a sigh. Why didn't you pick up? Don't you miss me? And then, faintly under her words, I could hear it breathing, low and patient and waiting. I knew then with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, whatever we had called, or whoever called me. It wasn't Emily, and it wasn't done with me yet. The thing at the edge of the meadow. I'd always dreamed of living by myself. And after years of noisy roommates and drafty studio apartments, finally had my own place. A small, time-worn cottage at the far edge of the sleepy village that I was in. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Encircled by a wide meadow and crooked old willow trees, the house felt like a sanctuary. Quiet and secluded and free of neighbors. Exactly what I thought I needed. First few days were just bliss. I'd packed at my own pace, rearranged the creaky furniture, and marveled at the strange echo of empty rooms. In the evenings, I'd sit in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea or a battered paperback. I would just let the silence sink in. The world felt far away, and I kind of adored it. Until the fourth night. I'm drawing the curtains in the front room. That's when I noticed something out past the fence. At the far edge of the meadow near the willow grove, a shape stood, and in the dim dusk it was only a vague smear of darkness against the pale grass, like a burn mark on paper. I squinted and leaned closer to the window, and it didn't move. Just a still, upright silhouette. It must be an old scarecrow, I muttered. I didn't recall seeing one when I moved in, but still, I pulled the curtains close and told myself to forget it. The next night it was there again. Closer this time. Maybe a third of the way across the meadow, and my stomach was tightening. Still no movement, no rustling from the breeze, just that human-shaped smear in the grass. I tried to brush it off as a trick of the light. Fallen branch, maybe, or a trick of my tired eyes. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. By the end of that week, I'm standing at the old stone well, only a few yards from the cottage. Stopped looking out the windows entirely, and in daylight I searched for footprints or even bent grass. The meadow stayed pristine. It looked like nobody had crossed it in years. So I started sleeping with the hallway lamp on. Every lock double-checked, and I even tacked a heavy quilt over the windows to block the view entirely. But the feeling of being watched only would grow. One night I jolted awake and the room was washed in thin bluish moonlight. For a heartbeat everything seemed normal, and then I saw it. I was standing in the corner of my bedroom and I froze, and this time it was clearer. No longer just a dark smear. It was tall and far taller than any person should be. Had impossibly thin limbs and shoulders that sloped like broken wings. Its head tilted too far to one side like a bird studying prey, and despite the moonlight, its face was still nothing but shadow. I tried to scream or to move, but my body refused, and my heart just drummed like a trapped bird. It stood there, still as it had been in the meadow, waiting. And then it tilted its head further, the neck bending at an angle that made my stomach hurt. It leaned forward, and though I couldn't see its eyes, I felt them lock onto me, cold and deliberately. A faint noise escaped it, a clicking sound like stones knocking underwater. I don't remember what happened next, because morning light poured across the room when I woke up, alone. The figure was gone. Air felt heavy like the echo of a nightmare. The locks are still bolted and the window shut tight. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't finished. And that night I sat in the kitchen with every lamp blazing, heavy iron poker in my lap. Midnight passed and silence deepened. For a moment I thought maybe it had just been a hallucination. And then I heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping at the window behind me. Story. Good title. So, 4 years old, I watched my father murder my mother. Because of family ties or relationships with the Kansas City Mafia, he served approximately 30 minutes in county jail before his father bailed him out. He got 5 years supervised probation, kept custody of me and my brother. My brother went to a state facility almost immediately due to being mentally handicapped. Spent the next 12 years being berated and beaten daily. Christ. At 16, I left his house with the help of family services in Oklahoma, moved in with my aunt and uncle. About 2 years later, I joined the Army Infantry. Since about 13, I've typically been one substance or another in me at any given time. Had 16 surgeries through the VA, and a little over 8 years ago, got off of pain pills, and that got me hooked. I've had nothing since then except for some beer and very small amounts of marijuana, which I've given up on quite a while back too. This is all off the top of my head, so sorry it doesn't really, read as being defined as what I would normally write. Since about the age of 7 or 8, I guess I would say, I've seen shadow figures periodically, especially when I've been in a very depressed state. It's normally just one or two at a time, and maybe once or twice a year. Before that started, I had 2 identical dreams back to back. I could hear my mom's voice coming down the hallway of my house, and I'd wake up and my room would be completely resituated. My bedroom door would be open. My dad never let me sleep with my door open in reality. And just as her voice would get close to the door, I would shift my view to the foot of my bed, and that end of the room. I'd see the last of a puffer smoke dissipating in the air and a cartoon figure of the devil. I don't mean as if he were drawn, I mean as a real-life figure, like red with horns on his head, pointed tail and the pitchfork. He would laugh, and then I'd wake up, and ever since that second night, I have seen shadow figures. About 10 years ago, the property I live at now, there were dozens of them all over my entire property. My wife and my 2 daughters were an hour south of me in Joplin. It's in Missouri. My young son was at home with me. Grabbed one of my rifles, and I sat in the corner of my living room where I could see every avenue of egress and approach. I grabbed my phone and I called one of my cousin's wives to come get my son. As soon as she got my son, I called an ambulance. Contrary to how it sounds, I had full presence of mind and I knew exactly what was happening. Not long after the ambulance got me to the hospital, my wife was back from Joplin. She dropped my daughter off at the same cousin's wife, and that's the point. I had a lot of medicine in me, and I don't remember this particular detail I'm about to share. With the curtain, John closed in on this little ER room. I was looking at the edge of it and telling her that there was an old man pointing me and laughing. This would have been the only time one of the shadow figures ever got close enough to really look more than just a shadow. The very next night, I was just having drinks at the Eagles Lodge and called my wife to come get me a ride because I had too many. And after she got me home, I went to my shop and she went inside. I don't know why she came back out, but when she did, found me in a pool of my own blood and called an ambulance. Cops saved my life. Spent the next several days in a nut ward at the Kansas City VA. This last year and a half had been very rough. I had given up again and quit my tiny little business. Came home and told the wife I wanted a divorce, and honestly, I was just trying to push her away because I knew that I've made up my mind again. This time I wanted to leave a letter, but I wanted it to be really perfect, so I used AI. Terrible. Oddly enough, it was the first time I was ever able to be completely honest about everything in my head because I wasn't talking to another person. The only place I was ever able to try to work on a letter, which certainly turned into writing a book about my story, was just a few feet away from where I had previously almost bled out. About that time, some acquaintances of mine informed me that they had access to some mushrooms. I've been working on getting to an ibogaine treatment program through veterans organizations in Mexico. Ibogaine. So I'd studied a lot now on the therapeutic aspects of psychedelics and PTSD. Told my wife, and she said she wanted to do them with me. So I told the friends to get some for us. The wife was not at home when they arrived, so the first time in my life I did mushrooms by myself. I'm not unfamiliar with mushrooms, and when she arrived home later that evening, we decided to do some together. They were very intense but short-acting. And after the peak was over and well into the downslide, they started giving me scratches on my arms and my head, and as soon as her fingers touched my head, it wasn't her anymore. I could see my mother's hand plain as day. And since then, we've had a dozen of signs that are unstable, that the energy of other family members are here with us. Some good, some bad. Sorry for the somewhat incoherent ramble on the story. I'm running behind today, but I wanted to get this message out to you. Don't have time to read this back over, so if any of it doesn't make sense, please reach back out to me. Thank you very much for your time and consideration. Hope to hear back from you soon. I think I just woke up for another universe, and it wasn't a dream. Something really bizarre happened to me today. Don't even know how to fully explain it. I'm not saying I had a dream. It felt like something way beyond that. Here's what happened. Last night I slept at around 5 a.m. and woke up around 9 a.m., then went back to sleep again around 11. That's when it started. I woke up in what felt like another version of my life, in a different room, completely unfamiliar, yet somehow mine. Standing at the door of this strange room, my mother was walking toward me slowly. The whole environment was muffled and blurry, like I was half fading between two states. I could hear her voice echoing and distorted. As she approached, I suddenly felt myself slipping, like my consciousness was collapsing. And then bam, I just woke up here, back in this world. But it didn't end there. For the next 30 minutes I couldn't move. Not like regular sleep paralysis, I've had that before. This was something else entirely. My body felt like it hadn't fully reconnected, my eyes barely opened. Everything was spinning and I had to fight just to blink. Felt like I'd been downloaded back into my body. And here's the freakiest part. The moment I opened my eyes in this world, I got a flash, like a download of memories. As if I had lived a life in that other place and was suddenly being ripped back into this one. Couldn't even remember who I was for a while and where I was. I just lay there trying to remember this reality again. So what the hell was that? Was it a dream or a glitch or a consciousness shift? Or did I actually jump into another universe where another version of me lived and just barely made it back? Has anyone else experienced something like this? My boyfriend's side of the story. I encountered something in the woods in Florida. My boyfriend and I went out around 10:30 to go catch possums and raccoons at my school's arboretum one night. I've run these trails for months, 2 or 4 times a week at early hours of the morning when it was still dark. I know them inside and out, and I'm comfortable with them. We walk my normal route, which just consists of basically taking the first path left and then walking forward with 0 turns. This takes you around the perimeter of the arboretum. Why have I never heard that word? It's where you can literally see the football field and residential houses. We've been walking about 45 minutes when I hear a noise to the left of me, like a small animal. I look around in the bushes, and the grass here isn't too long. He points toward the trail and asks if I see a deer. I've got pretty good night vision and senses, and I've been walking the woods by myself since I was 10 or 11. I didn't see it, but he just kept pointing and saying that it was moving. He even said it leaped across the trail at one point. By this point, the woods were completely silent, save for some very faint bug noises. But I saw and heard nothing. I jokingly asked him if he was hallucinating, and he made an offhand comment about how it was unusual for a deer to be by itself. Not really. We didn't think anything of it until after we got off the trail. We walk another mile or so, and the terrain looks totally unfamiliar and smells super strong, like weed and burning. I look at him and tell him that this wasn't the trail I usually took, and I had no idea where we were. About there, the path forked into a very dark path to a small trail to the right, which is the direction of the entrance. Despite his insistence, we go forward, and I took us right. After not even 15 feet of walking that direction, I hear a faint crunch of a branch to my right and ask something like, "Did you hear that?" He takes his phone out and turns the light on, and I start looking in the field thinking it's an armadillo or something. The grass here is incredibly dense, easily 4 feet tall and up to my lower chest, but there's no trees, and we verified in the maps. He's holding the phone above my head for about 45 seconds to a minute. Then he just says my name and to look, and I finally look above where I was searching the grass, and I see a pair of blue slanted eyes. They're about 9 feet tall, almost like those of a mountain lion. They were so bright they looked like they were glowing even without the light. I watched them scan from his eyes to mine, and then it started moving diagonally, completely silently. I grab his wrist and tell him we gotta go. I start pulling him back from the trail. Told him not to run because in my mind I was trying to rationalize this being a bear. He walked backward and kept his eyes on it while I led us out forwards. I took glances back occasionally, and I could see it stalking us for about maybe a 10-foot distance. It kept moving crookedly and almost completely silently. The bushes didn't seem to move as it walked. Really, the only thing you'd hear is like this occasional crack of a small twig. After about 1.5 miles of this, it let out a shriek, and for lack of a better word, like nothing I've ever heard before. And I've heard mountain lions and coyotes, but this was completely different. At this point, we ran out of there screaming prayers, and we could hear the crickets and other bugs crescendo and get louder as we made our way back. I called my stepdad and explained what happened to him, and he stayed on the line while we made our way out. Neither he nor I are very superstitious. We would even make jokes about my mom burning sage in our house to get rid of bad energy, but I could tell by his voice he believed us and he was trying to get us out without panicking us more. The whole time we were running, my boyfriend kept telling me things like, "This isn't the right path, we need to turn," even though it was just a straight shot back. Once we made it out, he couldn't stop looking toward the woods and kept telling me his body was telling him to go back and things like that. Super unsettling. I didn't start to panic until we got back to his house. Couldn't stand going home alone and walking by that forest at night to get back to my dorm, so I stayed at his place until sunrise. Every time I tried to close my eyes to sleep, I saw images of the eyes of these fucked up deer. Didn't sleep for 48 hours, and when I finally did, it was restless. It was like a 2 or 3 hour nap. I've had extreme paranoia since back. Can't stand to go anywhere without him on the phone. We've tried to rationalize it, but nothing makes sense. Didn't move or sound like a bear, and I've seen plenty of those. There were no trees for it to have been a panther. Not to mention the fact that there's never been a sighting in this part of Florida for several miles. Nothing else, but possibly a panther could have had those eyes or that scream, nor stalked us through the woods the way it did. The only other thing I could imagine was a drone or something like that. The woods were dead silent and we never heard any mechanical sounds. Lights in Michigan. This happened about 10 to 12 years ago. I'm 20 now, and to preface, my dad owns his own land in rural Michigan. Middle of nowhere, all woods and no service. But it's right on a lake, so it used to be really nice for camping trips. Anyways, we, being me, my dad, and my older sister, were on one of these trips and were going to sleep in the first night in the tent. That's when we all realized that all of our phones weren't working. Mine and my sister's phone were completely dead, even though neither should have been, and well, we both had iPhones at the time. My dad, who had a Samsung, had his screen completely glitching out with no apps and just random pixels all over the screen with no response. We all thought this was weird and kind of creepy, but this was back when technology wasn't really nearly as big of a deal as it was now. Phones were still kind of shitty. Soon after this, we all decided to just try to go to sleep. About 10 minutes later, there were lights outside of the tent. There was no cover on top, only screen, so it was easy to notice even as we were lying down. No one should have been around for miles at least, so none of us really knew what to do and just tried to lay as still as possible for about 5 minutes before my sister eventually started freaking out, waking my dad up, who obviously was never actually asleep in the first place. I stayed pretending, and I heard them whispering about the lights, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. It wasn't flashlights or other people or fireflies. They were glowing orbs, and some in the trees, one right in front of the tent about 10 feet away. That's when I sat up, and they weren't pulsing like fireflies would. It was a steady yellowish glow and much brighter. The one in front of the tent floated closer and closer. It was about 5 feet away maybe. It was the size of a baseball. My dad quickly shone a flashlight on it. Before it could get too close, it froze for a moment before they all quickly left. My dad swears to this day that they were fairies of some kind, and that he could see a smaller body within the light. I have no idea what it was till this day, and I was so scared I decided to just lay down and go back to bed. I was pretty young at the time, and haven't been back since. Even if it wasn't paranormal, I guess I'm just looking for anybody else who'd had a similar experience in the same area. Haven't been able to find anything similar online since. I regularly check every few years or so. My supernatural experience. I was born and raised in Germany, but I'm Turkish, and growing up with a mostly Muslim population also comes with its own horror stories about jinns. When I turned 14, we moved back to a small village in Turkey. It was with a huge culture shock, and when me and my twin sister started hearing about horror stories about these creatures, we found it absolutely cool that creatures could exist, and we were super into these stories, and horror movies, and the supernatural in general. My grandpa was the coolest man that would ever tell us stories most of the time, but would laugh it out at the end because he thought he would get scared, or rather, we would get scared. I was 16 years old when my grandma died, and I remember being devastated and heartbroken since we were living with them for years, and it felt like my own mother died. Grandpa died after 3 years. She died in Germany, so by the time her body was delivered to the village, it was 7 days past. Muslim burial tradition doesn't require caskets. The bodies are wrapped in white cloth and buried like that, slightly leaning to one side, which I've always found interesting. And if you fulfill a type of cleaning ritual, abdest, they said that you can see the dead body. Well, we did, and I found it traumatizing to see her laying there, and her face looked absolutely normal and alive. Couldn't wrap my head around the fact that she was dead. Me and my twin, we went back to the house and to our rooms, which is beside my grandparents' room. Our parents and their siblings, fighting already in the living room about money and property, started dreaming laying in the grave, and my grandma's grave, which was basically seeing everything through her eyes. I'm starting to fly to a 6-story building, which was in our home, and stopped right in front of the balcony where all the siblings were fighting. I immediately woke up when I came close to the balcony. Woke up to my grandpa entering the room to open the small window that we had. He looked at me and started telling him what happened. I didn't want to make him upset, obviously, but this was not the first time this happened. He opened his hand, started praying and blowing air on me, and kissed the top of my hand and said, "It's all good now." A year later, it's me and my twin sister. We're at my grandpa's house. My mom and dad are going through a divorce, and my mom moved to another city. Wanted to take us with her. We don't want to leave my grandpa alone, so we're living with him. He's super happy to have us, and one day I fell asleep and I started dreaming in the same bed again, and my back's toward the window. We're in the balcony, my mom's holding a coffee mug, and there's a dwarf for a super short man standing next to her, saying that they're getting married. I lose it, and I start yelling at my mom, and she points down the street saying, "Look." And I look down, and there's a slim man with jeans and no shirt walking toward the building. I'm leaning down, looking at him at that point, and I lose sight, and then he comes back out and is missing his arms from the shoulders with blood gushing down. Ran down the stairs, and he's not there anymore. But the neighbor's crying, holding her house key, saying that they're trying to take the key and invade the house. I'm super confused, trying to hold her hand, and then the guy reapers, and then the guy reapers and takes the key from her. The guy reapers. And now he has arms again. Runs to the house, and inside of the house is pitch black. The door, the windows are open, but full black inside. And all of a sudden the house starts to suck in all the surroundings inside, and me too. Hold on to a pole in the street and barely escape. And then I woke up full on sleep paralysis. Can't move, facing the wall, but start seeing light. So the sun must be rising. My grandpa woke up pretty early in the morning for prayers, and the first thing he does is come to our room and slightly open the window to let fresh air in. I waited like that for I don't know how long, tears running down my eyes. I started hearing his footsteps. and as soon as he opened the door, I bolted from the bed. He saw my state and freaked out too, I guess, and after his prayers, he made tea and I told him what happened. He told me that those neighbors practice black magic or go to hocus, men of religion who are in cahoots with these creatures. They can put dark spells on people. He also said there's always a meaning behind dreams. Said that they're jealous of my grandpa because he had more land and they could have did a spell on us. Fast forward a year, we move in with my mom in a new city. First day in the new high school, sitting in a class, and the first lesson is philosophy. The door opens and a dwarf man walks in. The guy in my fucking dream. My sister immediately holds my arms and looks me in the eye, and I knew that she was, and it was so weird. Well, I knew that she knew, and that's what was so weird. Before you ask, no, my mom didn't remarry, and obviously trauma and stories feed the imagination, but I believe some of these stuff are real. If anybody else has experienced stuff like this, I'd love to talk about it. This was my father's side. On my mom's side, there's even more stories about these jinns. I'd love to share those as well one day. Time skip, sleeping charm. When I was a kid, I occasionally was sent off to summer camps for socializing and whatnot. In one of those camps, I experienced something really weird. I was around 10 years old, living in a room with 3 other boys my age. Midday, each day we had a quiet hour. Don't know a proper term for this in English. Basically a forced midday nap time. We're all laying in our beds talking and telling jokes, and at some point we got too loud. So one of the ladies overseeing us decided to check on her room. We heard her footsteps in the hall. There's a bug on me. So, we heard her footsteps in the hall, so we immediately shut up and pretend to sleep. Then I remember hearing the door opening and her telling us that we should sleep and not talk, and her leaving the room. All this took no more than a couple dozen seconds at max. After this, I opened my eyes. I prepared to continue the conversation we had before, but instead of everyone opening their eyes, I see everyone asleep. Not pretending with a slight sleep smile, but real asleep. Call out everyone a couple of times because it seemed too weird to me, but all of them were truly asleep. So I was laying there, the only one who's still awake. I also remember that weird feeling of silence and stillness. I don't know how to describe this properly, and I don't remember my exact thoughts at that moment. I just remember the feeling. Eventually, after some minutes of staring at the wall, I fell asleep too. When we were woken up at the end of the nap, I asked everyone in the room about whether they truly fell asleep or were joking. None of them remembered anything. It weirded me out, but being a kid, I just went on switching my attention to something more interesting. I still think about this experience from time to time. Like, I guess it is possible for a kid to fall asleep really fast, but for all 3 of them to go from 100 to 0 in a matter of seconds is really weird. But what about this weird feeling of stillness and silence? And why none of them remembering anything at all? To me, it feels like I skipped time, and when I opened my eyes, it was not a couple of dozen of seconds passing, but minutes, which I didn't really feel at all. Or maybe the time froze. Or a more silly theory of our overseer lady putting a sleeping charm on us. But it, for some reason, failed on me. I'm sure I didn't fall asleep and it wasn't a dream, and I'm a really bad sleeper. Even when I was a kid, it took me some time to fall asleep. I was wild awake, and it was weird as fuck. I don't know. Hope no one out there is wild awake right now. Proof of the afterlife. From June 2022 to February 2023, I was homeless after moving to Florida. I spent a lot of time in motels, staying with strangers, and then a couple of months switching between friends and my grandparents. I did spend part of November on the streets. And those 8 months were the hardest of my entire life. I feel ya. In mid-August 2022, I was days away from ending up on the streets. I was out of money for the motel I was in. Didn't even have enough money to really apply for an apartment or speak correctly, let alone pay a deposit. And being in an electric wheelchair with 2 emotional support cats, I was petrified. That sounds brutal. I was sitting on the bed just sobbing. Sometimes I mentally talked to my mom, who passed away in 2016, kind of like praying. Didn't know if she could hear me or not, but it's always kind of made me feel less alone. And that day, I asked her for help. If she could hear me, please help me. I didn't know what to do. I have a friend who lives back in Washington. I met through Facebook years ago, and she's single-handedly one of the 2 most incredibly talented mediums I've ever come across. We don't talk very often. In fact, I think the time I had last spoken with her was in May of that year, when she came to my apartment a couple of hours from where she lives and came to pick up some things I was giving away before moving cross-country. Before that, it had been quite a while. Less than 5 minutes after I asked my mom for help, my phone rang. My phone almost never rings, unless it's a bill collector. My family and friends never call me. My family never contacts me, well, voluntarily, and my friends use Facebook Messenger. I looked at my phone, and it was my friend back in Washington. I answered, since she rarely calls. Must have been important. This is how it went. Your mom told me to help you. That singular sentence has absolutely solidified my belief in the afterlife. How could she have known? I hadn't said anything online. I hadn't told anyone. I literally only asked my mom for help in my own head. And skeptics may say that it's a coincidence, but a friend who's already a medium calling me less than 5 minutes after I asked my mom for help in my own head? That's not a coincidence. And she ended up helping me. We then talked for about an hour, and after I got off the phone, I passed out completely exhausted. And while asleep, I had the most incredible dream. My mom came to me. Never done that in my dreams before. She showed me where she was, and it was hard for me to be able to see, and I wonder if it's because I'm still alive and can't perceive the afterlife properly. She was in a mountainous area, and it kind of reminded me of the Scottish Highlands. She was with her soulmate. Well, when she had been alive, her entire aim in life was to find true love and romance in her soulmate, whatever you want to call it. She yearned for that more than anything. She had never found it. She only found a gay man. Nothing against him for being gay, but my mom was a woman, so... The man who knocked her up and left her. The man that she couldn't open up to, and a murderer, and a small handful of online dates that never turned into anything. In her afterlife, I got the sense that she just was resting between lives, taking the time to enjoy her soulmate and waiting, maybe for me. I remember trying to info dump everything I've gone through since she died, traveling around Europe and traveling around the entire world, moving to Florida. I'd written 2 books, and she told me that we didn't have time for that conversation, but that we would eventually. I asked her at one point if I was going to die. I'd been experiencing this overwhelming sense of death coming closer to me. She told me that I didn't have to. I could, of course, but I could fight it. I asked what my afterlife would be. It would be me mothering every child I'd ever lost in every life. Do you know, as a person who's wanted nothing more than to be a mother my entire life and who's never been able to have a successful pregnancy, how enticing that was? Above everything else, I yearned for my mom and to be a mom. But I fought against that. Life is short. I'll have time for that later. Before this, I didn't believe in soulmates. I didn't know if I truly believed in any particular afterlife. What if there truly was nothing after death? It terrified me. My mom told me that you can choose to have what your soul craves the most for eternity. Or you can have it temporarily, then be reborn. We have a choice. You should see me trying to pick a soda. I guess that would put me in limbo. And I'm not bendy. Incredible Dream. So like the title says, I had a dream. I was part of a group searching for a demon so we could destroy it. We were all dressed in tan cloaks with an ancient language or hieroglyphics written on it. We finally came upon a statue of the demon, spoke an incantation, and the demon emerged from the statue. One by one, the demon destroyed every member of my team until I was the last remaining. The demon attacked me, and I could feel it taking control over my body. And out of nowhere, another entity that looked like an ancient Japanese demon smashed into the side of the demon and screamed, "Vigna Papa Nasaka Rama." Probably just like that, too. I woke up and immediately grabbed my phone. I asked ChatGPT what the phrase meant. It's ancient Sanskrit that translates to Rama, destroyer of obstacle and sin. I don't speak ancient Sanskrit, obviously, and I've never studied it or looked into it at all. I'm convinced that I was visited by an entity in my dream. Over the weeks prior, I've been studying the occult and esoteric knowledge and ancient religions and human origin stories, UAPs and human consciousness, and other similar topics. I think I stumbled upon something that I spoke into existence, and I think an entity has tried communicating with my subconscious mind. Sounds crazy, but the phrase spoken by the entity in my dream was legitimately ancient Sanskrit, and I can't explain it. Has anybody experienced something similar to this? Let me know in the comments and help me figure out what's going on. I think we're missing part of the story when it comes to spirituality and the human consciousness, and I'd like to pursue that knowledge. I have been able to speak languages I don't know in my dreams. Well, that I didn't pay attention to in class anyway. So maybe somewhere back there I do know. I don't know. Let me tell you about my experience meeting my great-grandmother. It's well known in my family that my grandpa's mom was indeed a witch. A bad person with lots of bad actions to anyone who confronted her. She came from Spain in the late 30s. Went to live in a very spiritual place in Mexico, also known as an esoteric place filled with nahuales. And nahuales are beings with the ability to change shape, often taking on the appearance of animals such as jaguars, dogs, coyotes, or birds, among others. Beyond her strict persona, being rich was one of the most focusing thing about her, or perhaps they meant fascinating. Why? Because my family rumor, that it was confirmed by my grandpa, is that in her house she used to hid golden coins on the wall. And me growing in that house when I was a kid, I can confirm that house had a lot of passageways between the walls. Here's the story about her death. My grandpa's friend used to do very dark humor pranks between them. It was their weird connection style, but that day he called my grandpa and told him that his mom had passed away. Of course, my grandpa was mad about that joke, but it wasn't my great-grandmother's house. It was surrounded by police cars, because somebody had stole some papers from her vault. And she was a mean woman, and she was known in that town because of that and her greed around everything that involved money. Karma's a bitch. Then the hearse broke down several times on the way to the cemetery, and when they arrived, the coffin didn't fit in the hole. Years passed, I grew up. I left that town. My grandpa went sick, and it was time to go visit him, and don't get me wrong, I love that house, and if it were mine, I would treasure that house with all my heart. But the vibes are kind of heavy in certain areas, like the basement in my grandpa's room. Stayed there for 2 weeks, and everything was fine until one night. I remembered that there was a presence behind me during dinner. I even told my family, and they do believe in hauntings. So they did a quick cleanse with an egg, and the egg was fine, so I took no care about it. I took a glass of water and went to my room on the second floor. I slept, then I opened my eyes, and I could see myself out of my body. I know it wasn't me being dead, but I was floating over my body. I couldn't speak, and I know I could talk with my mind, but not with a voice. Something took me out of the house, and I could see a clear view of it, and I flew to the main door and opened it, and everything seemed fine. I was on my way downstairs to the basement. It was clean. Don't take me wrong, it's been years since my visit to the basement due to decorations and old furniture and old things from my grandpa are thrown there. But this time, everything was like it was used to be in the past, like 2 offices, 1 living room, a bathroom, and a garage. Everything, but from a different time. And a woman was there. She was counting her money, grabbing ledgers and putting them in a safe in the wall. She picked a huge painting of a ship and covered it with it. When she was done, she stood still, watching to the wall. I knew that she knew that I was there. I sensed it. She didn't like it. She turned around, and she definitely didn't want me up there. Go out. No, here. Mine. When I woke up, I told my family about it, not to my grandpa, because even what she represented in the history of our family, my grandpa adores her. Loves her, but doesn't speak a lot of her. We went to the basement, to my grandpa's old office, and there it was, a ship's painting. Behind it, in the wall, we all said it was a nightmare, and I didn't felt like it. My aunt took the wooden boards off the wall, and there it was, a huge safe. We couldn't open it, so they broke into it. They found papers and maps and nothing else. But that was the moment I think she snapped. From that moment on, strange things started to happen in the house. Shadows and chills and sounds, you name it. My last night there, I saw that crow following me everywhere. I knew it was her. It had to be her. I woke up, and before leaving, I went to my grandpa's bedroom. We talked and laughed and asked me to look through the window because something was annoying him. A sound. I looked, and there was a crow. He asked me not to close the window because of her mother's favorite animals were, in fact, crows. I haven't traveled to see my grandpa. He's been sick lately, and I know I have to go visit him. I'm not scared of her, but there's something I don't connect. When she said mine, did she refer to the money or about my grandpa? Was she a Nahuale?
Step into the world of the inexplicable with Paranormal M. Our stories will push the boundaries of your imagination. Don't miss out. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed about our latest intriguing tales. A haunted house I lived in. I was about 9 when this happened. Me, my mom, and my sister moved into this old house that was made before the Second World War. My great-uncle, who was a veteran, told us stories about when it was in the old glory days. Well, everyone in our town said that this place was haunted, and that just sent off signals in my head, especially when I remember driving past the front of the house and seeing a girl in the attic window. I eventually rubbed it off, but still hated the house. I always felt like I was being watched and never felt alone. I was always uncomfortable, and I just hated it, and begged my mom not to move us in. Yeah, that didn't happen. Whether you believe in mediums or not, both of my grandmothers had a hardcore belief that we had medium blood, or something stupid like that. But it skipped a generation or something. My room was the worst to be in. Always freezing, always felt heavy, and always had something weird going on. My sister just hated going past my room to go to the restroom, and I always hated being in my room. When we first moved in, I would knock on the floor and something would knock back. I would grab midnight snacks and see shadow men, women, and children from the corner of my eye. One time I was even making a sandwich. I saw the shadow woman in the hall. I just said hi, then made my sandwich. I turned for some reason, and I saw a shadow man, maybe a foot from me. It took me a minute before I ran to my room. One time I was sleeping in the living room, felt a hand pressed against my back. I heard light footsteps. It felt like a male's hand. My parents are divorced and no one had their boyfriend over. Another time I had a few pieces of paper on the table in the living room, and I made the joke that the ghost should move it. It took a moment before it shot across the table. Just stopped on the edge. I jumped up and ran. Another time I woke up in my room and saw a girl in my doorway. And not like skin tone and hair color, she was translucent. She was gray with gouged out eyes with blood going down her face. She had a dress on with a coat. I stayed frozen before I jumped up and moved past her. My sister rubbed it off until her boyfriend stayed in my room while I was at a friend's house. He saw the exact same thing, but rubbed it off until he heard my story. But what made this so much weirder is it's the same girl from the window before we moved in. And as the narrator, I must say I've never heard this term rubbed it off. Interesting. Something is attached to either me, a 22-year-old female, or my boyfriend, a 28-year-old male, and I need help. So I've had sleep paralysis since I was like 15. It's just something I grew used to. Other than the initial shock and fear, it didn't really bother me. When I was 19, I was living with my aunt, and I could just feel there was something in the house. That could be a whole post itself, but there was one experience that changed my perception entirely. I was working at Ulta at the time, just relevant to the story. Most of my job was just showing customers products and swatches. I normally used to get sleep paralysis when I was laying on my back, but this specific night before I worked, I'd fallen asleep on my stomach and ended up having a really bad episode. And she, my sleep paralysis demon, was always the same woman, was sitting on my back this time, pinning my wrists down. I could paint the picture of all the details, so this was by far, the most intense skin-crawling episode I ever had. My wrists were throbbing. I thought I could feel her digging her fingers into my skin. I could feel her legs squeezing my ribs and even her hair brushing my back. It was so vivid. I came to, and of course there was no one actually in my room, but my skin was crawling. Well, I went into work the next day per usual. Went through my normal day. I had been washing my arms off from all the swatches, and my coworker pointed out this weird brown shade that wasn't coming off. I brushed it off, but when I was showering later, I tried scrubbing it off, and although it didn't hurt, it didn't budge. It was identical bruises on both wrists where she had been holding me the night before. This changed my perception of sleep paralysis entirely. I no longer felt like it was just bad dreams, as it became very real. Moving out of that house seemed to halt. I hadn't had sleep paralysis or negative spiritual experiences for about 3 years until last night. So I moved in with my boyfriend about 2 months ago. This house has never felt bad or negative to me. Same with the boyfriend, obviously, or I wouldn't be with him. Me and my now 4-month-old puppy have been doing pretty great. Brutus, the puppy, has had a couple of weird incidents. Barking in an empty room, waiting in front of doors with no one inside, randomly going nuts. I figured I'd sensed something awry, so I chalked it up to him just being a crazy puppy. I saged the house regardless when I moved in. It's just part of my personal anointing process. I light incense pretty regularly, and things have been really good. Until last night. I get home a little after 2:30 in the morning. I wasn't super tired, and me and my boyfriend stayed up for a while talking. I decided I probably needed some sleep, so we went to bed. He fell asleep holding me in a very specific position. I fell asleep, but it was kind of like a weird half-awake, half-asleep kind of feeling. I was asleep with my eyes closed, though. It was weird because it felt like I was awake. It was so vivid. In my quote-unquote dream, I was looking at my boyfriend, in a different position than I saw last. And right behind him was a woman, not the same woman I used to see either. Her image shook me to my core. All the stereotypical sleep paralysis demon features. Dark hair, pale skin. The thing that freaked me out the most was its eyes. They were wide open, staring at me from behind my boyfriend's head. I couldn't see her mouth, because only the top part of her head was peeking over him, but it looked like she was smiling. It took me a solid 15 seconds to force myself awake. I physically had to pry my eyes open, which is why I don't believe it was sleep paralysis, and I could move as soon as I actually woke up. When I looked and saw that my boyfriend was now in a completely different position, the one that he was in my dream, I instantly felt nauseous. This did not feel right at all. As soon as I woke up, I sat up hyperventilating and crying because of how bad this energy felt. My boyfriend just tried to comfort me, telling me it's just a dream, and all that. But this was different. This felt demonic. I ended up shaking and crying in the bathroom last night, dry heaving from the image. Her face is burned so deeply in my mind I can't sleep. I'm cleansing the house again today. Something's telling me this is deeper than that. My boyfriend believes in the paranormal and doesn't have a problem with the way I handle things. But he's one of those, if I don't see it, it doesn't bother me kind of people. Something is haunting me and my sister. Ever since I can remember, I've had some scary experiences with things I can't really explain. From things falling off counters to seeing people that weren't there. It became a norm for me and my family to the point of us ignoring things. I believe it's all connected to the house that we were living in at that time. Because as soon as we moved out, these unexplainable things hit a plateau. But this experience was too stunning to ignore. First, a little bit to know before I start the story. It was a pretty chill night at my house. Everyone was asleep except me, my sister, and my baby's brother. And my brother's baby. Avery, who was about 10 months at the time. Avery was very attached to my sister, so she often slept with us. Me and my sister shared a room with a bunk bed. And of course, being the youngest, I got the top bunk. This bunk bed was worn and creaky. If someone was moving or doing anything at all, it would make a noise. Anyways, on this night I was watching TV while my sister went out to do something, leaving Avery sleeping on the bottom bunk. She had been in a deep sleep for about 30 minutes. And usually when she hits the 10-minute mark, we know that she's out for the night. To my surprise, my sister came back to the room pretty quickly and sat down very aggressively on the bed as well. And she left the door open. Her heavy sit caused a very loud creak to come from the bed, so loud that it made the baby wake up. I heard a quiet shh come from my sister from the bottom bunk. Avery started crying heavily. I've never heard her cry so hard, but I chose to ignore it because my sister was with her and would hopefully calm her down. But after 20 minutes of this going on, of constant crying, I couldn't take it anymore. I wondered what my sister was doing instead of comforting the screaming baby right beside her. I was annoyed beyond belief. Are you serious? I bend my head down to look at the bottom bunk, and all I see is Avery, sitting there, tears running down her face, alone. My heart completely drops. Felt like I couldn't breathe for a second. My body went completely cold, although I was in a well-heated house. My sister then bursts into the room, screaming at me for not doing anything about the crying baby. I was absolutely stunned. I seen my sister come in, I heard her sit down, and the door was still wide open from when she first came in. She asked me why I wasn't doing anything, and I simply replied, "I thought you were in here." I was visited by an angel during my lowest moment. Over the summer of 2021, I was visited by an angel named Tibri. I know how this sounds, but I need to document this on the web in case anybody else ever comes across a similar situation. I was driving to meet up with my friend and go and have as much fun as we could in New York during peak COVID restriction times. I was depressed, driving and listening to all my favorite sad songs on my way to hang out with my friend. I park up around the corner of his house and just start crying, thinking about my future with school and my business that I'm launching this year. I light up a cigarette, and a few seconds later, after me begging God for an answer and crying about my future, out of the corner of my left eye, a random guy, who looks like a Greek god with golden blonde, straight dread-like hair, like Zeus, appears next to my car on the sidewalk. It's a one-way. He had a golden aura surrounding him, as if he was going Super Saiyan from Dragon Ball Z, but very light. I could not tell you for $2 billion whether he was white or Mediterranean or what, but he looked like an actual representation of what churches make gods look like in their art. Even down to the halo part around the whole head. He walks up to me in a very casual New York kind of way, Queens. As I'm crying, he asks, this is the angel speaking, "I got bud if you need." Me. "Nah, bro, I'm good, I appreciate you." He starts walking away and comes back once more asking, "You sure, bro? Take my number down, I'm always around here." And for some reason I responded, "You know what? Yeah, man, you seem cool. I've been going through a lot." He goes, "You shouldn't be sad. Everything's gonna be okay, you got this." I got goosebumps. I asked the angel for his name as he's giving me his number, and he says Tibri. I texted the number saying my name, "Nice to meet you, bro." And he walks away and responds exactly 3 seconds later, "You too, my brother, I will see you soon," and walks to the corner of the block. Less than 15 yards. An immense light just shines down this one-way street and he disappears. I turn my car on, drive to the intersection, and there's only 3 places he could have gone, straight, left, or right. He went none of the above. He vanished. In less than 10 seconds, this man was gone, and he walked to the corner. His phone number no longer works. Goes straight to, "We're sorry, this number has boop, boop, boop." Some of you may laugh, but I feel like if an angel were to ever approach you and send you a message, what's the best way you think that they could do that won't make it too obvious? For me, being raised in New York, you always got someone trying to sell you weed and they take your number down, so I'm used to it. So instead of an angel coming down with its wings out and an obvious halo, what if they just pop out as a regular customer at your job? Or just someone that you let cross the street even when you have a green light? Or that homeless person who truly wants something to eat? What if that's why we're told to love each other equally? Because you never know who you might really be talking to. For all we know, this reality is all a test, and you need to pass the test by shedding kindness onto every soul you meet. If I caught my angel slipping, just know T-Bree, I'm gonna make fun of you for eternity. My father's village. This happened about 11 years ago when I was a child. Don't really remember the exact age, but I remember it was during the summer holidays. I live in Central Europe, and my father comes from a village in a neighboring country. The village has a population of about 1,000, so basically the whole village knows each other. And the village is a little bit, well, weird. It doesn't really have to do much with people. They're all really nice and like to see our family when we came there every summer holiday for 2 weeks. We didn't really go there for about 4 years because father and uncle had a big fight about grandmother's heritage after she had died. But I plan on going there alone once this whole COVID thing is over. So I guess I'll start with the stories. First, the village and the house of my grandmother, where I also had my own experiences. So the first story is one that was told around the village when my dad was little. Once there was a church celebration or a mass, or how it's called. And it's about this one man. I don't really know much about churches, but this one has that tiny balcony where you can observe things from above, and it has some extra seats. He went there because it was the last place with empty seats. He sat on one in the corner, but had fallen asleep. He woke up sometime later, and the church thing was still going, but something felt off. Apparently, after some time, he realized that the people there were already dead and buried behind the church, and everything was silent. He was scared, so he tried to open the front door, which was unfortunately locked. By the way, the spirits were staring at him this whole time. After some time, he had an idea to go up and wake up the village using the church bell. It worked, and the village gathered and unlocked the door so he could get out. The ghosts were not there anymore, and his hair went from gray from all that fear. I heard other stories, but I don't remember all of them, so if people who read this want to, I can ask my father about these stories. So now to my dad's experiences. It's nothing special, but I'm just kind of surprised at how many of them there are. First, when he was a teen, there was a celebration and he and his friends were messing around on the edge of the forest. At one point, they both saw a light deep in the forest. They decided to investigate. My father is really brave about these things. So they took a bucket of water in case of fire and went up. When they arrived, no light was to be seen. It was just pitch black like it tends to be in the forest. So they looked around for a bit and then went back. After some time, they again looked up the hill and saw the light again. But this time they were too scared to go there. So they kind of forgot about it and the light disappeared after some time. Then, when he was older and was in high school, this one is probably the creepiest and always seems too fake to me. So I later thought it was just some kind of a bedtime story that my dad made up. I joked about it a few years back, and my dad started to shout at me and was really angry with me for some time afterwards. That made me believe that he was telling the truth, because he seemed genuinely angry that I was making fun of it. So, he was in high school in a nearby city, and would always arrive home pretty late. This one evening was in winter, and it was around 11 p.m. From the bus stop, you have to take quite a long road to the house. Then it's just a few more houses, and then the forest. so he was walking towards his house. A few hundred meters away, there's a turn, so you cannot see very well what's further down the road. But then there arrived an old lady, and she was coming right towards him. He already knew something was off because what would an old grandma be doing outside at this time? She was pretty normally dressed. She had a skirt and a headscarf. But after they get closer, they noticed something. She was normally dressed, but instead of a face, there was nothing, just a black hole. He was obviously really scared, but continued to walk towards her. They crossed each other, but she didn't seem to be aware of his presence. So she kept walking towards the village, and my dad ran home and went to a troubled sleep. Those are the two that I remember. There are, of course, a few more. And now to the house stories. So first, my dad, when he was already an adult, slept there for a few nights. His grandmother used to live with them when he was little. He had a room on the second floor, and his bed was facing the door. Every morning, his grandma would look through the glass. And this was on the door to see if, he was awake. And then she would open the door. So now that he's an adult and sleeping in the same position like when he was little, it was close to midnight, and he was looking at the locked door. At one point, he asked himself, what would you do if the doors opened right now? And just a few seconds later, the doors would creak and open. He was staring at them for a few minutes, waiting if something would happen. Then he got up and locked them again and went to sleep. The second one is from my uncle when he was about 11 years old, home alone at night. The stairs to the second floor always creak incredibly loudly. He was about to go to sleep when the stairs started to creak, as if someone was walking on them. He was scared, but managed to put the blanket over his head and fall asleep. And now to me, my twin sister. We recently talked about this, and I told my sister I always felt weird and scared on the second floor. And when I had to go up there, I would be super quick and then sprint back down. I was surprised that she told me she felt the same. So here's her story. Me and my dad were sleeping in a tent in the garden. We were about 9 years old. The grandma and mom were sleeping downstairs, and she was sleeping on the second floor. She told me that she heard the door open and someone was walking around the room. She suddenly felt cold, like someone was hugging her. This lasted for about a minute. Then it stopped and the door closed again. And finally, my story. It's pretty similar to my uncle's. I was quite addicted to video games when I was about 10 years old. So once there was some kind of celebration and everyone from the house went there except for me because I wanted to play. So it was around 5 p.m. and I was playing downstairs in the living room when suddenly I heard the stairs creak incredibly loud like someone was stomping on them. I waited for nothing and bailed from there to the garden where I spent the next 2 hours before everybody got back. And I grew even more scared of the second floor and the stairs. Paranormal experience that's happened to me. My family went camping over a weekend down in Wyoming in the Yellowstone area. It was my immediate family and my cousins. One night during that stay, it began to rain, and my cousin and I decided that we really didn't want to get soaked in the tent. So we moved into my mom's red Suburban and put the seats down, and just stayed up and talked. I'm not entirely sure what time it was, given I didn't have a clock, but I'm assuming sometime around 2:33. We were talking for quite some time, to the point that even the forest was quiet. I sat up and looked out the back window of the vehicle and stared deep into some trees. Before anything bad happens, I always get a feeling beforehand. I remember staring down this line of trees and just getting an overwhelmingly bad feeling. Anyways, that feeling had caused me to just lay back down and continue talking to my cousin. I really didn't have the time or energy to see anything that night, because I knew if I kept staring in that direction, I would have seen whatever it was. As I was laying next to my cousin, a blue orb swiftly passes around the car that we were in. It was about the size of a basketball, maybe bigger. It was incredibly fast, so fast it shook the car. I jumped due to it surprising me, and I quickly grabbed onto my cousin and asked him, "Did you see that?" He gets a little startled from my sudden grab of his arm, and he just says that he didn't see anything. I brush it off and assume it's just my lack of sleep messing with me. Anyways, fast forward about 2 minutes. A mass of light blue, a glowing orb start to surround the vehicle that we're in. It's making a noise that I will never forget. It's sort of like when a car at high speed passes you. It gets loud, then quiet, then loud again. The whole car was shaking as these orbs continue circling this car at this insanely high speed. This time, he's experiencing it too, and I'm clenching his arms so hard and screaming while he's screaming with me. This happens for what feels like forever, but in reality, it was probably just a matter of seconds, maybe 10. After the orbs vanished, we kept holding on to each other for a couple of minutes while shaking. Neither of us wanted to open our eyes. He says he saw something different than orbs. He described it as a tesseract triangle absorbing into each other, like a dolphin swimming through the water. But he described them as light blue and glowing, just as I. I need help possibly identifying this creature I saw. My family is pretty abnormal, I'd say. Either that or gifted. We see lots of things that people would probably call us schizophrenic or crazy for. Hence why I don't share these things with people outside of my family or inner circle. And normally when I do have other people with me, they can see these things too. My mother and stepdad had recently finished building their house, and when I was about 9 or 10 years old, it was kind of in the middle of nowhere. It actually was right next to a prison as well as a military facility. My brother and I all got to pick our new rooms, and I chose the room with the windows facing the front of the house. Since the house was brand new, we hadn't had any blinds installed yet. Really, the only furniture that the house consisted of was our beds and a couch in the living room. Before I experience these abnormal paranormal things, I always get chills down my spine. I can sense it before it happens. And it's as if the hairs on my neck perch up, and I can feel the direction the energy is coming from. I believe it was the first night of our stay there. I had my bed right next to the window. I was struggling to fall asleep, so I just stared outside at the single street lamp right next to our driveway. I instantly felt sick, nauseous, and just overall icky. Something was going to happen, and I was sensing it, and I just couldn't look away. I have a bad habit of just staring directly into the direction that the energy is located. As I was staring, I saw this large humanistic creature thing. It was terribly skinny and freakishly tall. My heart just stopped. I've seen many freaky things before, but not like this. It's so tall, just slightly shorter than the street lamp. with long, skinny arms that dragged behind it as it slowly limps across. God, I was so frightened that I was frozen. I probably was holding my breath from the fear, and it just encapsulated me. As I see it limp across my yard, it crosses that street lamp. It illuminates all of its features. It's just disgusting and horrifying. It has no hair. It's fleshy. It's tall and skinny. Its features and its face are sunken in, yet it has no eyes or lips. Its legs are slightly bent as its arms drag behind it. It's so vivid in my memory even now. I remember every detail, and I'm 18 years old. Anyways, I just stare at it in complete fear as it crosses slowly. And after it passed that light, it just vanishes. I ran into my older brother's room after that, and I just slept on his floor. Let's just say I basically stayed up the whole night making sure whatever that was didn't come in. The energy just located in that area in general was terrible. I never left that house at night alone unless someone was watching me. During my childhood, did I meet the ghost of a girl or ? However, the roof was technically not the exclusive use of our kindergarten, as it was shared between our building and the next. And their penthouse also had access to said roof, but the family that owned the apartment, let's just say, had an agreement with the Babar to let them use it. Said family also happened to have a daughter, whom we were told was sick. But once she made a full recovery, she would join Babar and be able to study and play with us. This girl, by the way, she's the protagonist of this story. After noticing her looking at us from inside her home, and having taken as much of a liking to her as a little kid of that age can, I asked her to come play with us, to which she replied she was not allowed to, as her parents told her that it could make her more sick. However, after a few days talking from her window, we found a way to cheat the system. She would leave the door of her house open and would throw a ball at me, which I would then throw to her in return while we talked, which her parents thought was cute, so our caretakers kind of did too. So much so that they told my parents, which wasted no time to tease me and claim that I had a girlfriend, which embarrassed and angered me, and would tease me almost daily whenever they would come fetch me and would find me playing with her. This detail will be important later. After a few months, the girl stopped showing up. I was told by one of our carers that her health aid had gotten worse, and thus she could no longer play with me, and I never saw her again. While I was very upset about it initially, my parents and I moved away during that summer, and soon I was too busy making new friends in my new school to remember about her, as kids won't, kind of do. And so 10 years passed, until one day, after I told my mother that I'd gotten my first girlfriend, she decided to tease me and claim that she was the second, as the girl in the kindergarten came first. This tease made all the memories of that girl come rushing back. And after a few weeks of not being able to take it off my head, I decided to return where Babar used to be, and with some luck find the girl and see if she would remember me. Luckily for me, the family still lived in that house, and after I introduced myself and told them a very abridged version of the story through the speaker, they invited me to come up and talk. The father explained to me that sadly, the girl had passed away all those years back. But not to worry, as rather than inconvenience them, it made them happy to meet somebody else who remembered their daughter. After all those years, although he did say he didn't remember her ever playing with me. He did, however, confirm that they did not let her come out to play with kids. Her health was just very bad, and they feared it may get worse if she runned around or anything. Her mother, however, seemed somewhat bothered, as she mostly just stared at me silently. And once her father began showing me pictures of the girl that they still conserved, which, by the way, was indeed the girl I remembered, she suddenly asked me how old I was, to which I replied that I was indeed 16. And this is when the story turns weird. The second I mentioned my age, both her and the father were visibly shook and disturbed. The father quickly asked me to confirm my birth year, which is 1986. After looking at each other and then at me with bewilderment, the mother, which I mentioned had mostly been quiet, began telling me, visibly upset, that it was impossible that I had met their daughter, because their daughter had passed away in 1986. That made no sense, because my mother remembered her just as much as I did, and I do remember our carer mentioning that she was ill and could no longer play with us. So that's 2 adults and myself that remember her. Yet her parents insisted that she had passed away in 1986, and her father even borderline angrily threatened with showing me her death certificate. Things got very tense, and I felt extremely uncomfortable, and so did the family. So I excused myself, which they did make no effort to stop, and left never to return for another 10 years. By the time I was nearly 26, I decided to return to the house once more, despite feeling extremely uncomfortable about it, because as silly as it sounds, I could almost not believe my own experience, and I wanted to find out the truth. But by then, the apartment belonged to someone else. I'm now nearly 36, and I still cannot forget this story, which keeps coming back, usually after I have a dream about it at random every couple of years. I met a woman I'd had a vision of. When I was around 14 or so, I had 2 friends very interested in magic, Wicca, and the supernatural. I'll call them Abby and Brittany. One day, Brittany wanted to try something that she had read about, a massage that was supposed to open up the senses or something, like a spiritual type release. This massage was supposed to only be done with 2 people in the room, but we were young teens and didn't care. We decided to try it in Abby's room, in what was basically an attic. Brittany would massage Abby first. We turned off all the lights so it was pitch black, and Brittany started on Abby's shoulders. I was sitting on the floor, unable to see anything, and that's when it happened. I began to feel weak and lightheaded, like I was about to pass out. I took a deep breath and was suddenly no longer in Abby's room. I had been transported somewhere else entirely. A bright blue sky, no clouds, no sun, all of this expanded above me. Flat beige rock was as far as I could see. From the rock, people were growing, also entirely made of beige rock. Some were more formed than others. Some were just tall blobs. It was like the blobs were being shaped by an unfelt wind. I walked along the eerily quiet surroundings by these people until I came to a rock woman in the middle of my path. She was older, her hair in a bun with glasses on her face, and her arms had not yet been formed. I was just standing there looking at her, when just as suddenly as I had arrived, I was back in Abby's room. Abby was crying, and Brittany quickly turned on the lights. She told us that she had seen a dark place with reds and blacks. It had scared her badly. I didn't tell them what I saw. I had thought that was that, We never spoke of it again. A couple of years later, Abby and I were at the mall. I had to use the restroom, so I went and did my business and walked out of the stall to the sinks. And that's when a woman approached me. She held out her hands. They were wet from washing, and said in what I'm thinking was Italian, "Scusi." She was dressed in beige from her glasses to her high heels, with her graying hair in a bun. I was shocked, but showing her how to use the air dryer for her hands. She said grazie. We smiled at each other and I walked out. I never saw her in real life again, but a few years after our encounter, I had a dream. The beige woman was lying in a canopy bed, surrounded by thick purple and red blankets, and her family. A window could be seen looking over a beige city with bright blue sky. It was clear she was on her deathbed. She told me something, and I wish I could remember what it was, but then she peacefully passed. That's when I woke up sobbing. For years, when I would think about her, I would tear up and I would feel like I was having an adrenaline rush. When I finally was able to tell others about this, I couldn't speak without crying. Creepy damn experience. I was 14, so maybe my memory is foggy, but I swear to God it was real. Spirits and ghosts were always a joke to me until this moment when I legitimately felt like something happened. Warning in advance, this may be long and it's on my phone. Noted. So 3 or 4 years ago, when I was around 13 or 14, I was at a close friend of mine's house. Me and him always hung out, and I would stay the night and all that jazz. As one would do as a 13-year-old, I trusted him. His house has kind of a big backyard where we would always play soccer. Now, if you're standing flush to his house looking at his backyard, there is a normal wood fence straight ahead and a normal one to the right. To the left, there is only a 2 cinder block high little wall. He would always tell me that he saw big black figures and shit in his neighbor's house windows and yard and the porch. Meanwhile, might I add, nobody lived there at the time. I would always write it off as him just jokingly saying these things to mess with me. He would describe them as these 8-foot-tall black masses, just pitch-black things standing there or existing there. And when he would look away, he would go away or move closer. Keep this in mind. So me and him are in the backyard messing around, playing soccer, kicking the ball, eating whatever you do at 13. We have our goal set up with shoes against the cinder block wall. Dumb as hell. I shoot a couple and they bounce off and come back. Then I hit one and it goes over the wall, into the neighboring house's yard, and rolls to the furthest corner of the other yard. Of course, my friend, being him, said, "You kicked it, go get it." Willingly, I jumped over the little wall and head to the ball. As I walk over, yes, walk, I don't know what I was thinking, I feel the only way I can describe is my stomach drop like a roller coaster. I turn my head toward the neighbor's house, and standing against the wall is this massive, at least 8, maybe 8.5 foot tall black mass. Just there, existing. I froze, ball in front of me, and all I could do was stare. I felt like I was holding my breath. I wasn't focused on anything but its entire body. I heard my friend tell me to hurry up, and I finally snapped. I grabbed the ball and looked away for half a second, and when I looked back, it was gone. But I said, "Fuck that," and I grabbed the ball and ran as fast as I could back over. I went inside and got a drink and just didn't mention it. The next morning I asked my friend and he said, "Yeah, bro, I see him all the time. It never does anything. It just is kind of there." This is going to be hectic, But here's the beginning of the past few months. Just to start off, yes, I believe in the paranormal and all that. I also practice craft stuff, so it's fairly well a part of my life, not to mention that I've dealt with more than my share. As of recently, I moved states to live with a family in an attempt to disconnect from the other side of my family, and to basically start a new page in my book. The house I moved into has been in the family for like 40 plus years, and a few years back my great-grandmother passed. It was sad, and I miss her much. However, I'm still unsettled about seeing her trying to get into her old room, my now room. She hates doors and had to put one up for privacy deals. While I was rearranging and taking some old things out of my room, I moved a brass photo frame that holds the Last Supper, the one with Jesus and his crew. Not Christian, please remember, no respect to those that are. I had set it on the floor to be hung up elsewhere. I think it looks kind of cool, and like Da Vinci, it was kind of chilling while I was putting books on the shelf and whatnot around my room, when I hear loud thumping from the living room. That wouldn't be an issue if there was someone else in the house, even my cat, but it was just me. I firmly believe that that was my great-grandmother telling me to put it back up. I did. 2 to 3 months after I moved in, her husband, my great-grandpa, passed also. They both still kind of roam the halls here and make sure that things are in check, which is fine and all, and I'm just getting used to seeing them so often. This isn't just a few things that happen here and there, though. The past 3-ish months, there's been a figure that wasn't invited into the house that seems to try to spook me and my boyfriend as much as possible, going as far as scratching me a few times. There hasn't been a night since my boyfriend moved in with me that we've gotten a full night's sleep because of this thing. I know it upsets the great-grandparents to a degree as well. It really goofs with the energy of the rest of the house. I've tried cleansing, removing, even going to someone with my more experience than me kind of thing for advice. Curious to know a non-skeptic's thoughts on this experience from when I was about 14, 8 years ago. So it's 2 a.m. I'm very tired right now, procrastinating going to sleep. So apologies if this post is incoherent. I've never told anyone this story before, because they'd probably think I'm crazy. I myself am an atheist, though this memory sure raises some doubts. I've decided to believe it was hallucinations caused by anxiety, since at the time I had terrible social anxiety, along with generalized anxiety disorder. It was also during the same year that my depression came on suddenly and hard. My parents divorced. My mom moved into an apartment, and I spent every weekend in this old house with my dad. Now, this was in 8th grade, and I remember middle school was when the vast majority of my nightmares were about demons and ghosts. So that would have also raised my anxiety surrounding that. So probably the easiest thing to dismiss was one weekend I saw a tall, dark shadow moving out of the corner of my eye. Another time, as I was getting into bed, I saw a bald white man walk toward the wall, only for a split second. Those are whatever. People see things out of the corners of their eyes all the time. Whenever my dad was out of the house and I was sitting in the bedroom upstairs, I would constantly hear footsteps downstairs. If I went downstairs to look, nothing would be there, and the sound would stop. I go back up and into the bedroom, and I would hear it again. You know the cracking sound of settling? I would hear it relatively frequently at night. Okay, so now I'll describe the big night that absolutely terrified me. My dad was out of the house. and I was in bed upstairs trying to sleep. I heard that cracking sound non-stop, every few seconds. Then I started hearing the very distinct click of a plastic cap on the string curtains hitting against the wall. It was very regular, like it was tapping the wall once per second. At that point, I was getting very anxious, and I put on my headphones and started listening to music to calm down. At the time, I used Tumblr, so I was also scrolling through that. Suddenly, a chill went down my spine, and I got a very strong feeling that I was being watched. I think this was because I subconsciously heard the garage door open, because my dad did come in the room a few minutes later, but I'll get into that. Anyways, chills down my spine, feeling of being watched. Soon after that, I started hearing talking through my music. Couldn't make out any words. It was a man's voice, just sort of talking normally. First, I closed Tumblr in case it was an ad or something on there, but it didn't stop. Then I closed the music app. It still didn't stop. A second or so after I stopped the music, the voice turned deep and angry and honestly demonic and was yelling. At that point, I ripped my headphones off, ducked under the blankets, and started hyperventilating. Maybe a minute later, my dad ran into the room asking what's wrong. I just told him I didn't hear the garage door open and thought someone broke into the house. I didn't want to say that I was hearing voices. Something like that's never happened to me since. A month or two later, my dad moved into an apartment, and I never had to go back to that house again, thank God. Although, in one bedroom in my mom's apartment, if I'm in it at night, I would constantly hear footsteps from the kitchen downstairs. But nothing extreme ever happened like in the original house. And now she's moved out of that and bought her own condo, so I'm completely free of haunting paranoia. I'm just sharing this because I'm curious what somebody who believes in hauntings has to say about my story. Oh, and another experience that I can't explain. In 6th grade, I heard the future. Though it's actually a pretty boring story. I had a male bus driver in the morning and a female bus driver in the afternoon. One morning I was on the bus and suddenly heard my afternoon female bus driver yell, "Hey!" I looked around, but no one was reacting to it, and I double-checked the driver. It was definitely the male one. That afternoon, I was on the bus home with the female driver. At one point, a girl on the bus screamed, and the bus driver yelled, "Hey!" and it was exactly the same yell I had heard that morning. The first story is strange. That one, I think, was coincidence, sir. Or man. The fleeing light in the woods. First off, I've never really had anything paranormal happen to me. And I've had a relatively short life so far, 25 years. Being a scientist never really made much sense to believe in something that can't be proven. However, that's all changed that one night. About 4 years ago, I was attending a college in southern Arkansas, and I was getting my bachelor's in biology. My then girlfriend, and I didn't have much money, so we shared an on-campus apartment so our scholarships would cover the rent. This complex was on the outskirts of the campus, right next to a rather large pine forest that some people went to smoke in, but you could always hear them. In between the forest and our apartment was a dirt parking lot. Our apartment sat on the first floor of the complex, on the side closest to the tree line. We came back to the apartment after grocery shopping one night. After bringing all the groceries in, I decided to sit out on the patio, looking at the forest and the night sky. It was a nice spring Arkansas night, with not a cloud in the sky. So this didn't surprise my girlfriend. She went inside and I sat down. As I'm listening to the whippoorwills, excuse my pronunciation, I notice a green light coming from just behind the tree line. It was blinking relatively slow and looked as if it was around somebody's neck, and that thing was digging. Not digging with a shovel, but more animalistic, like a wild boar digging for grubs kind of digging. It was making no sounds and seemed to be minding its own kind of business. As I'm watching this thing very intently, a car pulls into the parking lot, briefly flashing its headlights over the light. At this point, the light stood up, turned solid red, and darted in a straight line through the trees away from the car. Not like a deer running through the trees, mind you, but straight without moving. I estimated that it probably moved at about 40 or 45 miles an hour. Needless to say, I did not sleep that night. The next day, I got up early and went to go investigate where the light was. There was a small opening next to a creek where I estimated the light was coming from. However, there was no signs of digging or tracks of any kind. I walked in the direction of the light where it had fled to. The clearing quickly went back to being a thick sort of understory made of lots of shrubs and oak and greenbrier and limbs. I could barely walk through without getting cut up, and I certainly couldn't walk in a straight line. I did not know what I saw that night. I've certainly never heard of anything like this, and I've never seen that light again. I talked to some of the wildlife management friends to see if they had tagged some animals with an LED collar or tag or something that looked at me like I was crazy. Doing so would make no sense and would reduce the survival of the animal. So what was it? An extraterrestrial? A lost spirit? A person? Or an animal? I guess I won't ever really know for certain. Since then, I've seen many other paranormal things. I've stayed in cabins where the chairs moved by themselves. I've witnessed green orbs from the sky crashing into the earth. I've witnessed spirits vocalize and speak out possessions my friends have taken from them. It all started after seeing that light. My neighbor that didn't age. There was a family of 4 that moved into our neighborhood. Couldn't figure out where they were originally from, but they looked like they're Asian and Hispanic at the same time. They're very good-looking people. Can't explain, but you can say that they're very attractive. I haven't seen them out or talk with other people. I think it's odd that they go out all together almost every night. The 2 members look like a couple, and the other 2 look like a mother and her teenage kid. I wasn't quite sure if the teenage kid's a boy or a girl, but they, he or she, look very attractive in a way I couldn't explain. They have short silk black hair, but not very short with pitch black eyes, and a sad body posture, like in a weak demeanor. At that time, I thought that he or she was a bit weird. It was night and I was practicing running around the block preparing for school competition. On my way home, I saw the weird kid sitting in their front yard, and they were holding a water bottle or a tumbler. I said hi, and they just nodded, so I didn't try to make conversation, and I headed home. I never really talked to the family, but they stayed in our city for at least 5 years. Not quite sure. Then I heard from my parents that this family are moving to a different country due to their jobs. I didn't ask my parents a lot about them, because I guess I was just too busy with teenage stuff, sports and girls and all that. But looking back, I wished I asked more about them. So fast forward to this day. I moved to this country, and I'm not going to disclose this for my anonymity, and I saw the kid sitting alone at my local coffee shop. Again, I'm a rational, logical guy, but when I saw them again, I got the chills all over my body. Same posture, still very good looking and still young but dressed maturely. I don't know if he or she remembered me, but I looked older now. Mysterious woman in the antique shop. When I was in my 20s, I used to live in this apartment on the edge of the city. I used to walk around to explore, because if you would go down the main road, there was a long stretch where there really wasn't much except woods, fields, and things like that. If you kept going, though, it would become another subdivision. I should say that many weird things happened to me and my friends in this area where I lived. I'm pretty sure it was built on a burial ground or something. Anyways, one day I was walking down the side of the road, away from the city, and I saw a sign at the end of a little gravel road that said Antique Shop. I don't remember really the name of the shop, but it's irrelevant. Anyways, I remember that I had been looking for a specific item, so I decided to walk to the shop to see if they had it. As I walked down the gravel driveway, there stood what looked like an old log cabin, but it was the antique shop. A little behind and to the left of the shop, about 50 feet away or so, stood a house. The house was inhabited by the woman who owned the shop, which I found out later. Anyways, I walk into the shop, and it looked very old and rustic inside. I was the only one there, except behind the counter sat an older woman with gray hair. She immediately started talking to me and was very friendly and welcoming. Felt like I'd known her forever. We chatted for a while, and I remember asking her if they had that item that I was looking for. She said no. We talked for a while. I felt like I had lost track of time, like we were in our own little world. After chatting with her for a few minutes, she told me that I could go up to the house and ask the shop owner if she knew if they had the item. I walked up to the house and knocked on the door. A different older woman answered, and I asked her about the item. I told her that an old woman in the shop had told me to come up to the house and ask. She immediately got really wide-eyed, and a look of fear came over her. She explained to me that no one else worked in the shop except her. I guess she was taking a break from running the shop and relaxing in the house. Still looked scared and in shock. She quickly tried to shoo me away and told me goodbye and closed the door quickly. I just walked away not knowing what else had happened. It still gives me the chills thinking about it. Ghost bride in a haunted church. Several years ago, I had an opportunity to help restore a 100-plus-year-old church that's been vacant for roughly 45 years or so. The church is attached to what was once a primary school that had already been restored into office spaces. This was a no-brainer since it was literally a couple of blocks away from my house. Under the table and responsibilities were incredibly easy. Since the church had been empty for years, we only worked during the day since the electrical system had yet to be installed. But during the days I would work, I'd always see movement in my peripheral vision, but nothing was there whenever I would look in that direction. This happened a lot to the point where I'd become accustomed to it. This all changed a few months later when the building became operational as we converted the church to an event hall designed for any event that you'd pay for. Well, after business hours one evening, I get a call from a tenant saying that something was making noise in the basement of the church. Since the power hadn't been installed into the basement at this point, I made sure to grab my brand new charged flashlight and keys to see what was happening. As soon as I got into the basement, I could hear what sounded like power tools running. I go in and start making my way through a pitch-black labyrinth of basement toward the noise. I find the cause of the noise, which was an air compressor. I know they bleed air at times, but I made sure I bled all the air before I left earlier that day and unplugged it. I looked to see if someone plugged it in after me, and it's still unplugged. At this moment, my brand new flashlight starts to flicker, and another unplugged power tool turns on behind me. when I turned around to shine my flashlight at it, the light goes out completely. I haul ass out of the basement through complete darkness towards the door. I get out and see the tenant is standing at the door with a puzzled look on her face. She asks what was wrong, because I'm out of breath and I'm freaked out. I tell her what happened. She smirks and says that apparently doesn't surprise her. She's lived in the neighborhood her entire life. Tells me that as a child she attended the school and church. She then tells me a story of a woman who held the last wedding in the church before it closed down. It was a sad story because the woman was stood up on her wedding day and ultimately committed suicide because of it. After that night in the basement, the paranormal activity happened more and more often. It got to the point where the coworker fell off a ladder. This ladder was always secured, and he'd been up and down it 100 times. When I asked what happened, he said it felt like he was pushed while leaning over to the paint. There were even times where the movement I had always seen sort of started to take shape. Instead of a blur, I started to see a person standing there, but nothing when I would look in that direction. What finally pushed me over the edge was the night that I guess you can say I met her. Since events were always held there, I'd always lock up afterwards. After an overnight booking, I ran into the guests as they were leaving. A gentleman asks me if there was any other people in the building that night. I said no, as we make sure that the office part of the building is vacant during overnight bookings. He proceeded to tell me that he heard yelling from the basement and footsteps on the balcony. I assured him that they were the only ones there and began locking up the building. As I'm locking the doors, I hear faintly what the gentleman was referencing. I could hear footsteps on the balcony, and I yell out, "Anyone still in here?" I did not get an answer, but at this point, I'm ready to go. What I hated most about locking up is the light switch was nowhere near the door. So you'd have to shut off all the lights and then walk about 30 feet to the door in darkness. I shut off the light and immediately sprinted towards the door. As I reached for the door, I heard footsteps behind me and a muffled voice say, "Leave." I didn't stop to see what it was. I made my way to the glass entry doors and to the other side as fast as I could. As I'm locking the door, I see movement inside of the church. I look up, and I see a ghostly or shadow-like figure standing where the altar once was. I quickly looked down to ensure I locked the door, and by the time I looked back up, the shadowy figure is now making its way to the glass doors. I honestly don't remember if I locked the door or not because I immediately got the hell out of there. After that night, I made sure I never entered that building after dark again. I think a haunted doll spoke my name to me. Summer before last, my boyfriend and I took a road trip to Omaha with the main purpose of visiting the Museum of Shadows. We're both somewhere between believer and skeptic, and thought it would be a great experience for us. Leaning in, he even paid the $20 to rent a spirit box to use as we walked around the museum. If you haven't visited the Museum of Shadows, I'd recommend it, even if only because I found it very cathartic. It's mostly dolls with tragic stories attached to them. But walking around reading all the stories of suffering and sadness and families associated with many of these items, it was very heart-opening, for lack of a better way to word it. Some items I felt were very creepy. That's where people associated the haunting was coming from when people owned them. I believe sometimes people create their own hauntings by just being afraid of an object. Same with the dolls owned by children who had passed. Families are just so saddened and grieve so hard they begin to assign their child's spirit to those items. So sad, but really made me feel a great connection to the people I didn't even know, which I think is great for the spirit, however sad. So our spirit box was not giving us anything, literally not a single intelligible word. We weren't angry nor disappointed. It was sort of a neat if we heard something, but understandable if we don't sort of a thing, because we sort of assumed a majority of items in there couldn't be haunted. They've got this doll, Demas, and when I say my heart rate increased just typing her name, I'm not lying. And she lives in a chicken wire cage towards the back of the first floor of the museum. She's scary looking. Not a normal looking doll. I got uneasy when I just saw her. And this is in the building of frightening dolls. Maybe that's intentional, though maybe they put her in the cage to sort of raise your apprehension. There's a sign above her, and it says if you choose to speak to her, always say goodbye, which of course you should do with any spirit, but Demas is apparently particularly malicious. I'm a pretty bold soul, so as we're standing there together with the spirit box, I decided I wanted to talk with her. "Hello, Demas," I said, and the spirit box just kept clicking. I didn't know what to talk to her about, but I'm always worried about lost spirits, so I decided to ask. "Are you okay?" And without hesitation, the spirit box said, "Amanda." Extremely clear. My boyfriend and I both heard it. I said, "Did it just?" And he was like, "Yeah, absolutely, it said your name." I said above that, I'm brave, but I immediately filled with a sense of dread. Something about it saying my name and that we'd gotten absolutely nothing else out of that box the whole time was terrifying. And I do not scare easily. I didn't continue the conversation. I just said, "Goodbye, Demas," and ushered my boyfriend away from her because I was so uncomfortable with her following that. Just now I went through their Facebook feed to see if I still felt the same about her, and saw an event where they let people hold her. I've never felt so appalled seeing such innocent-seeming photographs. That doll is the only item I've ever encountered that I am sure, 100% sure, is haunted, and maybe even malicious.